Read the disclaimer. Doofus. And please contact us through this email address with questions or fan art. Thank you for your support.
So, Kingdom is in full swing now, and while it mostly seems to be focused on original characters and Beast Wars characters, there is a small portion of it that's focused on G1. 50% of Wave 1's G1 is actually fairly solid, and neither of the figures in that 50% have anything to do with Optimus Prime. Salutations, denizens of the internet! I'm Firebite27, and let us commence our analysis of Transformers War for Cybertron Trilogy Kingdom Warpath.
Right off the bat, can I just state how much I love how photorealistic this tank is? I'd like you all to just take a minute here with me and take in every single detail molded into this figure, and how gorgeous it is. Okay, time to temporarily bring down the mood. As much as I like the realism, I can't exactly deny the fact that the super realistic tiny body comes in stark contrast to the bulbous and somewhat overgrown tank turret. From what I understand, this is mostly to emulate the turret of the G1 figure, which, fun fact, was never meant to be a normal-sized robot. Unlike literally every other vehicle toy from the Transformers line, Warpath and the Minibots were taken from Microchange, which was basically the idea of taking small objects and turning them into robots of the same size. Which is part of the reason behind the whole clusterfuck of Megatron, Soundwave, and Blaster's scale in the G1 cartoon. But because Sunblow Production had to fuck everything up, they weren't treated as small vehicles, but just normal vehicles. Go figure. And it doesn't help that the treads were left white for cartoon accuracy. And you know why those treads were left white on the cartoon? Because that made it faster and cheaper to animate. Don't get me wrong, speaking as an animator, I totally get it. You don't want a lot of colors in your character model because that makes it harder to draw every time you have to animate them. Gray or silver treads would have made this look a lot better, but even in spite of this cheap appearance, I actually really like how the tank mode looks. The red and white work well together. But I have to ask this question for personal reasons. Did they have to use off-white paint on the treads when the treads themselves were already molded in off-white plastic? Asking redundant questions aside, this alt mode is very, very nice, though it will never be in scale with most other military vehicles in the Transformers line, or at least those that feel photorealistic. However, that small size does actually lend itself to one of my niche interests in terms of this review series, putting figures into goofy poses for no other reason than my own amusement. And because Warpath is so small, it fits right into this whole entire niche interest of mine. Mostly through being some hapless schmuck for a kaiju to destroy, which is yet another reason I am glad that they made this design as photorealistic as they did. The photorealistic detail paired with the somewhat antique appearance of this tank makes me appreciate it far more than the Generations Warpath mold, or at least the BotCon Blast Charge version. Although that might just be because Kingdom Warpath has some paint on it. Speaking of the paint, I should probably talk about the patchwork appearance of this tank mode that the paint provides. Try saying that 5 times fast. The unpainted plastic parts are only a mild contrast from the painted plastic parts, but overall, I actually like the painted patchwork appeal. I especially like the application on the entry hatch, as it makes it look as though it is a separate part to the rest of the turret. But I know there are some people who absolutely hate how this looks. I mean, I can't say I agree with them in respects that it looks bad, but I do agree in the respect that it does stick out like a big old crimson sore thumb swelling in the moonlight. Now then, what say we discuss some Artankulation?
The turret can swivel, the barrel of the cannon can point up and forwards, and the wheels roll. I have to ask, was having me do an articulation segment really needed?
Kinda. Anyways, let's go to the underside where we can talk about one of the other issues with this figure. Parts forming. For it seems as though we have not yet escaped the looming shadow of Earthrise laziness. Fortunately, the parts forming is semi-optional, as there's a 50% chance that when you get it out of the box, you won't actually need it. But if you're me, then you're the 50% that actually will need to use this part. Though, I would have used it anyway because it's a nice gap filler for underneath the tank. Also, the tank mode has 3 blast effect ports. Here, here, and of course, here. So let's wrap up this tank mode with some size comparisons. Here's Warpath next to last week's review Optimus Primal, the last Decepticon tank I reviewed, Cybertron Scrap Metal, the last Autobot tank I reviewed, Siege Impactor, another marvelous Crimson figure, Earthrise Thrust, BotCon Blast Charge, this tank-like alt mode from RID 2001 Galvatron, the Absolute Chad, Kingdom Cyclonus, a standard Qtama, a standard can of sparkling water, and Fraudside. So, in a world of tanks, this vehicle mode is amazing for how realistic it is, but it's still a bit small. Now then, Warpath, transform. Before I talk about the robot mode objectively, I think I should pay some special mention to the transformation itself because it is one of the best elements of this figure. Warpath's transformation is incredibly complicated, but at the same time it is incredibly satisfying to accomplish. Panels unfold, fold up again, pieces turn around, and fold up to form other bits, and overall it's just really satisfying. Especially the components in the legs. The legs are godlike. Though, if you're trying to film them in stop motion, they can be a bit of a pain in the butt from what I've heard. And the best part is that it doesn't need to be this complex, but chooses to be so anyway, like Titan's Return Trigger Happy and Topspin. And I hope you don't mind me phrasing it this way, but the robot mode that we get from it is the shit. It is amazing. From the outside, it may look like a humble recreation of the cartoon model, but it is so much more than that. Heck, I'm not even bothered by the lazy placement of the tread cable on the forearms, because I like to flip them out and pretend that Warpath has forearm-mounted chainsaws. The other sets of treads on his feet also make him look swift, and combined together, he has some really dynamic posing potential despite being so blocky and basic. However, there are 2 issues, and unfortunately I have to mention these in order to make this a fair review. The first of them is the back. I mean, it's no Earthrise RC or Transmetal Rat Trap in terms of ugly backpacks. In fact, it doesn't even have a backpack to speak of, but the combination of 2 panels just being folded up back here, as well as the scaffolding that allowed the arms to transform into the tank treads, well, I'll just say it's not a great look. Speaking of bad looks, the shield. Okay, look, most of the time, you guys know that I don't have a problem with parts forming. I love Paleotrex, I love Zadar, and most of the modulators were also pretty good. But, I don't know, something about this just feels different. I think it might just be because the legs go through such a crazy transformation in order to incorporate all those panels into the back of the calves, but they didn't add a few more? Well, that would have probably drove up the part count. Whatever, I just don't like it. Although, weirdly, I do like it when it's placed on the shoulder since it seems to call back to the Zaku, which, as I recall, are kind of the stormtroopers of the Gundam universe. Though, that might be appropriate if Warpath is ultimately featured in the Kingdom Netflix show because its writers seem convinced that it is a great idea to give every single beloved Transformers character in the canon the same life expectancy as a stormtrooper, and yet less personality than a stormtrooper. Somehow. Though I am curious, how high does that make insurance premiums for stormtroopers? There's my answer, I guess. Also, he gains a single blast effect port from the shield. Okay then. And speaking of weapons, I think we should talk about one of the few links that this figure has to the previous chapter. Apart from the dubious use of parts forming, is an abundance of weapon ports for all of your weaponizers, fossilizers, and modulators.
The head is on a ball joint, arms move out and rotate at the shoulders, swivel at the bicep, bend at the elbow and swivel at the wrist. Waist swivels, legs rotate at the hip, and spread outwards, swivel at the thighs, bend at the knees, and tilt at the ankle.
The one part of the articulation that I hate above all else is the ankle tilt. Not because of a lack of range, but because of this terrible clicking noise it makes. It's the result of some weird grill details molded onto the inside of the foot, and unfortunately, I thought that it was in fact a bit of the foot that covers up a weapon port catching, so I cut that off, as you can clearly see here. Maybe once the review is finished, I'll clip off some of this grill detail, but for now, it's an annoyance that I'll have to deal with.
I don't frequently share my personal opinion of the articulation, but in this case, I agree. The clicking ankles can get bent.
But ultimately, the ankles are just a mild annoyance, and they don't detract from the wide variety of play options that this figure presents. Kingdom Warpath can be as dynamic or as mundane as you need him to be. All that he asks of you in return is that you don't judge him by his size alone, because this is not Earthrise Cliffjumper 2.0. It might be small for the size class, and yes, it may have a parts forming piece, but simultaneously, it is larger than Earthrise Cliffjumper, and doesn't feel like it's trying to rip you off of $5. It can comfortably be compared to some figures of Studio Series Bumblebee. They're small for a deluxe, sure, but the parts count is generally worth the $20 that's required to purchase them. Heck, in a lot of ways, I feel it's comparable to most Studio Series Deluxes. Pre-G1ification, that is. But mixed with the simplicity of mainline generation Deluxes. So overall, a worthy addition to any collection. Also, I've heard many people claim that he has Cybertronian Tourette's, but here's the question, does he spell it with an O-U-R or a U and two R's? Now then, let's do some size comparisons. Here's Kingdom Warpath next to Optimus Primal, Scrap Metal, Impactor, Thrust, Blast Charge, Galvatron, Cyclonus, a standard Qtama, a standard can of sparkling water, and Fraudside.
Okay, before we get on to the actual score, I'm just going to state this now. From here on out, do not use my score as a tier recommendation. I think now I've realized that was actually a really stupid idea. It sounded good on paper, but it's better to use a system of 1 to 10 for actually scoring the quality, rather than scoring my tier recommendation, because if I do, then I'm going to award a bunch of high scores to figures that don't really deserve it. And I'd say that, honestly, he scores an 8.5 out of 10 for me. He's a great figure with great articulation, and even though I have heard a few horror stories about the quality control on some copies, I haven't been struck by Kingdom once in the QC department. This is a great figure. And really, what more can I say about it than, what did the script say? What more can I say about it than I am blue, skibbity, scabadie? And really, what more can I say about it than skibbity bop dada?
Remind me, are we insured on damage from meme-related incidents?
No, and I fail to see how that's relevant. Oh shit, we need to get out of—
Too late.
Skip it up and that up. Fortunately, Firebite 27 and Amaya were able to escape the explosion without suffering any injuries. The SCP agent from Zimbabwe, on the other hand, was not so lucky and died at the hospital from a kidney stone. And now for something completely different.